Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee for the. I'm Councillor Hayley Gascoigne and I'm chairing this meeting. So first on the agenda, we have Chair's announcements. So just a few first for the members of this committee who I see are diligently doing this already. Please keep your cameras on so that people watching back this meeting can get some engagement from us, see our faces when we're talking, and then if the officers turn on their cameras when they are speaking. If you wish to speak in this meeting, please use the raise hand function, or otherwise you can write in the chat that you wish to speak, and then you can speak when I call upon you. And then the only other thing I wanted to say into the chair's announcements was just a brief update on the food strategy action plan. So there's not too much to share, and I hope that there'll be more to say in the new year because it's in its final stages of development, and so we should be able to comment on it next year. So this is something that Good Food Oxfordshire have been guiding the development of through various stakeholder meetings and reviewing what else has been working across other councils in the county. It's aligned with the themes of healthy place shaping and supports our rural economy, which is in our plans and our policies, such as our joint local plan, our nature and climate action plan, which is something we'll be talking about later in the agenda, as well as the council plans, which are coming forward soon for both South and Vale. And to just say that the key priorities, there are 5 for the Oxfordshire Food Strategy, and these are to tackle food poverty and diet-related ill health, build vibrant food communities with the capacity and skills to enjoy food together, grow our local food economy through local enterprises, local jobs, local wealth generation, strengthen short, transparent local food supply chains, and improve the health and sustainability of institutional catering. So that was just the short update I wanted to give on the food strategy, but again, more in the new year. That concludes the first agenda item. So the second agenda item is apologies for absence. Candida, have we had any apologies?
There have been no apologies.
Okay, no problem. Do you wish to take attendance, or you can just take it from looking at us here?
Yes, I can take it. I've already got the attendance here. That's fine, thank you.
Brilliant. And agenda item 3 is the minutes of the last meeting. Are there any comments on the minutes from the last meeting, or should we take those as a correct record? I'm just seeing some nods and some thumbs up. Excellent. We'll take those as a correct record then, please, Candida. Agenda item 4 is declaration of interests. Are there any members here who wish to disclose any pecuniary interests or other registrable interests? Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to state that I work for National Energy Foundation, which provides the Better Housing, Better Health Service in Oxfordshire, which this council contributes funding to, and that is possibly relevant to action item 21 on the draft nature and climate action plan that we're looking at later this evening.
Thank you, Councillor James. Unless I'm told otherwise, I'm going to take it that it's okay that Councillor James takes part in the discussion, but it's good that she noted.
Yeah, agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no others, then we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is urgent business. I have none. So agenda item 6 is public participation. Candida, I don't believe that we had any public speakers today.
That's correct. Nobody's registered.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 7 is the update from the Cabinet Member for Climate Action, Nature Recovery and Strategic Partnerships. And this is our council leader, Councillor Bethia Thomas. So would you like to give your update, please?
Thank you, Councillor Gascoigne. I really appreciate being here, and it's really great to see everybody here. I do really appreciate all the time that you put into making SEAC what it is, and helping to shape the decisions that are made at Cabinet. Excuse me for the background noise. We've got timers going off. Apologies. The last time we met at the Task and Finish group, you added some valuable commentary to the local nature recovery strategy. Commentary to the local nature recovery strategy, which was included in the council's consultation response. The consultation came after a great deal of work to develop the strategy over the last year, and I believe that it is a very positive move for the district and for nature recovery right throughout the county. So I'm looking forward to seeing that develop. Obviously, Dom and the team have been working really hard over the last few months to get some major projects online, and I have a few updates for you. Work on developing a local area energy plan will kick off in January following the appointment of contractors next week. There are two phases. First, there will be an overarching Oxfordshire-wide plan looking at a more strategic scale at what investment and changes need to happen to the energy grid in Oxfordshire. The second phase, which will be led by our officers, will work with the appointed contractor to create a district LAEP for the Vale. So that's good news, and I look forward to hearing further updates after January about how this is progressing. You may also be aware that the climate impact assessment tool became a mandatory part of Council's decision-making process in September, and this will now be used in all council reports and has been since then to help officers and members understand the climate impacts of the decisions that we take. If you haven't seen it, please take a look. It's really clear and shows how our impact on the climate is considered in every decision we make. So definitely something really important that's been incorporated into the process. Finally, I was delighted to see that we had another fantastic response, probably the best yet, to the latest round of the Climate Action Fund, with 21 organisations supported with a total of £142,000 to help with a wide variety of projects, from small-scale energy saving schemes to exciting nature recovery projects. And that 142,000 was the 100,000 that we had allocated for this year, plus the rollover from last year, because we didn't quite spend the amount. But because of the changes that we made, I think that SEAC was involved in the recommendations for, it was oversubscribed. So that's really exciting. And we have managed to get a lot of organisations involved across the district. Just as a sort of going forward with that, I think I would really like to make sure that we're covering all parts of the district, so there's no black holes. And I think I can't wait till next year. So thank you very much. I'll turn my camera off once I've stopped speaking, because it should be there for just SEAC members. So I'll just turn my camera off and just keep monitoring the meeting as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas, for your update to share with the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee this evening. Particularly excited to hear about the local area energy plans as they develop, as I think they're a key way that we'll be delivering net zero across our districts. Also good to hear about the success of the Climate Action Fund, which is something that this committee has also been involved in. So are there any questions for our Cabinet member this evening? I see none. So thank you, Councillor Thomas, and we'll move on to the next, you're welcome, item on the agenda. So this is really kind of the substantive, moving on to the substantive part of the meeting now. So we have the draft Nature and Climate Action Plan, which today is presented by our Senior Climate Action Officer, Chloe Bunting.
Hi, thank you. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. So hopefully you can see that now.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect, that's great. So this evening we're bringing a final draft of the NCAP to you following the 2 councillor task and finish groups that we held in January and August of this year on actions to be included in the plan. And then we had a request arising from these groups for the committee to review the plan again in its final form. So this is what we've brought to you today. So just going to start with a refresh of the stages of development that we've had so far. So the process began over a year ago now, last autumn, when we started to review the current climate action plan, looking at the longer term actions that we needed to bring forward into this plan, considering new legislative requirements that have come forward, for example, the Environment Act, and also the officers from the Climate and Biodiversity team have collated and drafted new ideas from various research, our working knowledge and development of specialisms as the team's grown, and looking at the current gaps in the current plans and bringing these forward. So nature recovery and adaptation were big key themes that we were keen to really bring out in this next version. So we first had a task and finish group back in January to capture members' initial ideas across a range of themes and bring those forward. We then held a staff survey to seek ideas from South and Vale officers and get their input into the plan. This created a really long list, which we've now made into a short list. So we analysed and cross-checked all the suggestions from all the different streams and refined those actions. We then had an internal team workshop, so we looked at refining those actions further, and we created measures to monitor, to make sure we could monitor the progress of the plan as it goes forward. We then held a task and finish group again in August to share these draft actions with you and capture your input and take them to the next step of refinement. The actions that are being presented to you this evening have also gained head of service input and service manager review of actions and measures to confirm that these are within team's current capacities across the council. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts later. So the next step for us in terms of the next iteration of the Nature and Climate Plan is presentation and design of the plan. So what you see today is the draft in terms of the content that will be in the plan, and we'll be looking at working to refine the design of the plan and hope that that will be in line with the presentation of the council plans too. We will then be taking this final draft and design to SMT in the new year and then Cabinet in March for approval. So we've got 5 themes within the plan. So we've got operational net zero, then looking towards district net zero, so looking at engagement, communities and behaviour change. We've then got a theme on district net zero focused on partnerships, and then we've got a theme dedicated to nature recovery and a theme dedicated to adaptation. So some points to note, read the actions and measures that are presented to you today. So we will do a further refinement exercise on the order of the actions within the theme. So when we've had final feedback, we will then look at reordering some of those, for example, bringing forward the reports on the annual reports on our progress towards our targets towards the top and making sure that that kind of reflects our priorities. Actions where the issues already included in another council action plan haven't been included. So, for example, issues or policies which are covered by the emerging joint local plan or air quality actions because we have the joint air quality action plan, and also local food, which is in the Oxfordshire food strategy and the forthcoming district food action plan. We've also designed the measures to be as smart as possible so that we can really track and gain a real view of the monitoring of progress. And it's important to note that not all of the actions lend themselves to being smart targets due to external factors, for example, around availability of external funding and kind of some uncertainty how we then may bring that forward. So those actions within the plan are presented as developing ideas or creating options, for example. So in terms of a recap of the performance reporting for the plan, so this will be in line with the council plan reporting, and we'll do an in-depth review each year in which we'll add and amend actions to reflect emerging priorities, forthcoming strategies and action plans, any new partnerships that might be formed, and thinking about the national context as well and how that may change. The adaptation and nature recovery themes we really expect to expand and evolve, and our response and role will really largely depend on the emerging local nature recovery strategy for Oxfordshire and the Oxfordshire adaptation route map, which is being developed at the moment. There will be live data available more frequently than annually, so we're going to have an interactive dashboard that will mirror the council plan data that they're looking to present, and we'll continually remove and mark complete actions that have progressed so that we can highlight that progress and tracking against our targets. So thank you, that concludes my short briefing. Please now to seek any comments, questions or thoughts on the plan in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you for that update, Chloe. I think it was really great to see. Thank you for bringing the most recent draft of the Nature and Climate Action Plan to us as we requested. I think it's good for us to look at it at this stage. I now would like to take any questions and comments from members. So whilst they're thinking of those and looking to raise their hands, I'll just make a few comments. I was particularly pleased to see the way that the actions are organised in terms of the headings, because it aligns with our own targets. So we're split out into the operational net zero, but also the district net zero. Obviously, that is how we have our targets. So I think that is good to see the actions split out in terms of that and the other ones as well. And also the inclusion of SMART targets, because I think that's probably something that we gave as a strong feedback in previous plans and strategies, that we were looking at the actions and they were sort of marked red, amber, green, but not necessarily with something SMART, and it was hard to know where those gradings sort of came from. So having SMART targets will really help with that. I have a few more things to say, but I'll let others speak. So who else has any comments or questions for Chloe? So first I have Councillor Clegg.
Sorry, Councillor James, I think I beat you to it by less than a second. Thank you for that. Really interesting and really good to see this progressing. I have some fairly technical questions around number 34 on the minimum energy efficiency standards. This is on the number 34 of the actions, I think it is. Yes. Around minimum energy efficiency standards for rental homes. One of the sort of the key metric is the number of MEES breaches investigated and enforced. Is it implicitly assumed that every reported breach would be investigated, or is that something that also should be tracked? That should be tracking the number of reports as well as that of investigations and enforcements. And secondly, my question is, are tenants aware that this is a thing that they can report? How well publicised is it that a tenant can report a suspected breach? I suppose also there's a question, is there anything in there that we could do to protect tenants from reprisals, as it were, from landlords who don't like being investigated? So sorry, three questions in one.
That's okay. Yeah, no, all good points. So we've worked with the private sector housing team to create these actions. So where they're assigned to individual heads of service, that we've kind of worked collaboratively with the team to put those, because they'll ultimately be responsible for delivering that one. So we'll take the comments back. I noticed, Jessie, you've put your camera on, so you could come in there. Yeah.
Yeah, so we would need to double check with the private sector housing team, but the recent adoption of the enforcement policy means that we can now enforce against minimum energy efficiency standards, and it's my understanding that if it's reported, it has to be investigated. Whether that goes anywhere is obviously a different story. There is probably more we could do to kind of promote the fact that this is a tenant right, but I know that the team are doing that already, but we can talk to them about that.
Perfect, thank you.
Jessie.
Thank you all. Councillor James.
Just just about to not unmute myself, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much for this. I think it's really good. That's what I'd like to say first of all. And there were lots of things that I was looking for in it, and they were all in there. I've got loads of small comments from individual points, but just I'll start off with a couple of things, if I may. And one is that something I thought would be helpful on this is, as well as the sort of indicative timescale, some kind of indicative impact. So some things on here are really high impact, would make a massive difference. So, for example, if we manage to sort of decarbonise the waste lorries, that's, or each time we manage to decarbonise a building that's owned by the council, that's quite a big impact on our carbon footprint. Whereas others, which is, while still important to do, such as reducing the carbon footprint of our website, can only have a much smaller impact because they just are smaller sources of emissions. I just thought it would be helpful, if possible, to have a sort of like a small, medium, high impact rating for things, just in helping us to prioritise and see also when we're measuring how well we're doing, really. Because if we're ticking off a lot of things but it's all the small impacts, then that might be a worry for us. And secondly, I wanted to consider how it fits with the report that we had last time to this committee about our progress on our operational net zero targets. And we still have a net zero target for 2030, although it was very clear from that report that is ambitious, and it definitely involves us as a council being able to find, funding and resource to deliver the things that we are now much clearer on what we need to do to achieve that. Looking at the indicative timescale on some of the sort of bigger items in here that are the things that were identified in that report, such as installing solar to offset our electricity demand, and looking at the replacing our vehicle fleet with electric vehicles. They're tending to be in the indicative timescale of long, which is 4 years plus. And if that's true, then that's kind of saying we're not going to hit our now. That's kind of saying we're not going to hit our 2030 net zero target, which is, I think, a concern for us. So I wondered if you could say a bit about how those two reports line up, whether there's any way of prioritising the list. And I know you said you were looking at the order to try and align with what we know we need to do for the operational net zero target.
Yeah, so to take your first comment first, so yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion about having some level of impact, and we can definitely look at that when we're doing the prioritisation exercise and bringing that out as part of that. The second aspect on aligning it with the progress reports, Dom, was there anything you wanted to say on that element?
Yeah, hi. So you'll notice obviously the net zero reporting is a key action in there. So it's a sort of separate work stream to be reporting on that. But just in terms of the timescales, long would still allow us to beat our 2030 target if we achieve the full. If we achieve the actual action by that date. So I don't think anything in here, so that there is an obvious read across between the two plans, or the report rather, and the plan. You'll be relieved to hear. Clearly it's the same team working on both. But I suppose that the where we've got short, medium or long, it's intended to give an indication of when that action would need to be completed by. So it's not necessarily the fact that they're not happening at the moment. You'll be aware that we're obviously busily trying to decarbonise as many of the buildings as we have funding for at the moment. So that work's ongoing, but we recognise, because we're reliant to a very large extent on external funding sources, which in themselves are not unreliable, that's the wrong word. They're governmental funding sources which are advertised on a yearly basis. We are reliant on those funding windows coming open and the funding being available. So it's very difficult for us to put anything other than long on those. And for things like, I mean, the other big issue, I suppose, in terms of our decarbonisation journey is our waste vehicles, and we all know that is a major issue for us, because not only are they extraordinarily expensive when you compare them to the traditional internal combustion engine vehicles, that we're also struggling currently with the technology, because it's not yet proven that they can do the sort of routes that we need to do. And there's a lot of work going on at the moment looking at the potential for those vehicles to be able to do the kind of rounds we need to do. So it's difficult to put anything other than a long time on those, because the reality is that it's going to take us at least 4 years to get into the sort of meat of those projects, frankly. I hope that helps.
Okay, I'm seeing a nod. Thank you all. So Councillor Della Harp next.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question on item number 40 in the report, which is support the development of land-based carbon sequestration offsetting model for districts. This might come up in a later item in the agenda, so just stop me if it's going to come up anyway. But it mentions Innovate UK Net Zero Living, the project, and to implement, so what does it say? It says to deliver the project. Who is Innovate UK? What's our relationship to them? And is this a project that is currently underway or still needs to happen?
Do you want me to take this, Chloe? Yeah. So Innovate UK is a government funding body set up, as the name suggests, to stimulate innovation in net zero projects. So last year we were successful in attracting funding from Innovate UK towards this project. So it's a project we're currently running on. It's due to finish end of next June, I think, and be reporting by then. So it's a partnership between ourselves, South Oxfordshire, and the other 2 districts in Oxfordshire, and most of the work is being done by the local nature partnership. So it's something that's well underway, and hence the timescale on this one is short, because we know that that will be reporting in June next year. That, however, won't be the end of the story, and this is where having a plan which is updatable is helpful, because that will finish, and then we will look to see if we can implement some form of nature-based carbon sequestration, and it does link to the workshop item at the end. But yeah, just that, hope that covers that one for you.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. So Councillor Horton next.
Yeah, thank you. My question was specifically on point number 36 regarding the active sustainable travel initiatives with, we say Oxfordshire County Council, other partners, fair enough. Obviously, we're calling out usage data for initiatives that are located in council-owned car parks. I'm basically just wondering if there's, given it's not really necessarily our remit so much, how much more we can do to measure that, because obviously it could have a fairly large impact, but I'm just sort of a little confused as to how we can really measure that so well towards what we're doing. And the second point is a very, very minor formatting issue, but it would certainly, I think, make things a little bit more readable if we could put the column headings a little bit more frequently, so I don't have to scroll all the way to the top of the section just to figure out which column means what.
Yeah, on the columns, I think that'll definitely be something we'll be looking at when we're kind of designing the final version. Yeah. Yeah, so the Oxfordshire County Council, so ultimately working with them as the Highways Authority, so kind of recognising there is a level of influence we can have, but also recognising that has to be in partnership. So it's kind of looking at things that we can do. So for example, hosting car clubs in our car parks to have like another model available to others. And there's also work that's going on around strategic cycle routes within some of the other teams across the council. So I think it would probably potentially come down to also what Councillor James was saying around having those high, medium, low level impact actions, and kind of thinking about prioritising in terms of that. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Dom? No.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor James?
Thank you. I'll come back for a second go if I may. So I did want to raise about how we're funding this, because thanks, Dom, you said about how there's a lot of uncertainty about when external funding may or may not be available for these things. We've had really good success, absolutely. I mean, we've had brilliant success at getting external funding, and it's made a big difference to our carbon footprint already, particularly on leisure centres. But I want to question why we have to wait for external funding. Recently Cabinet and Scrutiny have looked at and are be coming to council an item on land acquisition, which has been a confidential item, so I'll say no more about that at the moment. But it does show that we can borrow if we need to carry out work. And these seem particularly good candidates for borrowing because we would expect to make a saving from them. So we would expect to be able to repay that borrowing. So, for example, if we install or build solar farm or solar on buildings, then there's a benefit either from using that electricity or being able to sell it. It's a commercial prospect for us in a way. Or certainly offsets our own costs. And similarly with the building decarbonisation, the kind of sort of carbon savings that have been estimated for decarbonising some of our other buildings, they're fairly sizable, which to me implies, I mean, I haven't seen the detail, but to me that implies that we save quite a lot of fuel as a result of those decarbonisation programmes, and therefore save money on the running costs of those buildings in the longer term. So I appreciate that this is a broader question than for the NCAP itself, but I think it's important that the NCAP leaves space that the council can decide to fund this work in other ways. And I really don't think we are credible and we are going to be able to create behaviour change in the district if we won't put our money where our mouth is and we won't decarbonise all of our own assets. That's another reason why our 2030 target is so important. It's not just that it saves carbon, it's also that it then is a secure footing for us to try and take a lead in the decarbonisation of the district, subject obviously to technology being available, which certainly for the lorries is a big issue.
Yes, who wants to come back on that one?
I can have a go if you want, then Claire if you want to add anything. So you'll note action 16 in the plan, and I'll let everybody furiously scroll through to it. Is investigate new and or innovative finance opportunities to support the council's decarbonisation project. So this is an area we're well aware of, and we're doing a fair bit of work on at the moment, looking at all sorts of new financing options, borrowing options, and so on, because clearly, as you've already pointed out, there are a few of these projects which are in effect spend to save projects. I think the jury's out on whether the running costs of buildings reduce with decarbonisation. It rather depends on the price of electricity in the longer term, but I think you're right, there are a number of those which are definitely spend to save. Some of the ones which don't pay back, we know, so some of the older buildings which are more difficult to decarbonise because you've got to install things like insulation in the roof and walls and things like that, they have much longer payback times. But we can certainly look at all of those, and that there is a fair bit of work going on in this sphere at the moment to look at how we can fund some of these projects where there isn't currently government funding available, or it's only being made available drip fed to us, which is the situation at the moment. So yeah, that is all part of the plan, and it is sort of captured, albeit in sort of in brief form in action 16. That action 16 disguises an awful lot of activity, I would say.
That's really good to hear.
Thank you for that. Okay, not seeing any more hands at the moment, but I do have a couple of questions. Oh, Councillor James again, but I'll go first. So I was pleased to see about training for the departments in particular, because the climate action team can't take on all of the action here. It can't work across everything that we do at the council, so that was particularly good to see. With regards to decarbonisation of our buildings, I think it was action item 17. Yeah, so the one we were just talking about, and 18, so decarbonisation plans. Now this document, I believe, is for both South and Vale. Now South I don't know quite where it is in the process and exactly the timescale of it, but it's planning to build a new council building. So I was wondering where that features in this plan, because it's not decarbonisation as such, because you would build it, good from the start, basically. So I was wondering where that features here and how we will be tracking that.
Helpfully, I was plugging my headphones in and missed the crucial bit. Were you talking about the Didcot Gateway new offices?
Yes.
Sorry, that was a good guess, wasn't it? So clearly we're not going to prepare a decarbonisation plan for the new offices. So they are being designed, as you will have guessed, to be as close to net zero in operation and in building as possible. So they're not involved in that particular action. I actually can't remember off the top of my head, Chloe, whether it is captured in any of the other actions, but clearly it is something that's happening, and we'll all hear about it as and when a decision is taken to move forward with that.
We haven't got it initially at the moment because it is in its planning phase. So the theory behind that was that the planning policies would capture making sure that was to the standard that we would want it to be. So then when we do our review, when it's relevant, it can be added. It can be added back in. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, that's good to hear. Just wanted to make sure. Councillor James.
Thank you. Yeah, just one more question from me. I just wondered about the Oxfordshire retrofit strategy, and who's leading on that, and will it also include are there opportunities for us as local authorities to just make it easier, as well as sort of signposting to funding or cost-effective loans and things, particularly for the private sector to retrofit, whether we can also use our role as councils to provide things like economies of scale, look at sort of particular housing types in our district, particularly ones that might be a high priority for retrofit because they're not well insulated at the moment, with sort of advice and blueprints, just to make things as easy as possible for residents if they are trying to do that.
Yeah, just want me to pick that up, Chloe. Yeah, so the retrofit strategy it's in its development phase at the moment, so we're sort of still scoping out exactly what's going to be in it, but the idea is that it's an Oxfordshire-wide strategy. It's going to be led by the retrofitting team at the county council, with all the district councils and city involved in it too. So as I said, the scope isn't exactly decided yet, so we can kind of push for what we want to be in there. So we can certainly take back those thoughts, and we can bring an update to the next SEAC meeting maybe.
Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of agenda item 8, the draft nature climate action plan. So just remains for me to say thank you, Chloe, for bringing this item to us, and of course all of the work that went into drafting that over many months, taking in all of the input as you laid out before. Thank you. Okay, this brings us on to agenda item 9, which is the biodiversity audit update. So we will be receiving this verbal update and presentation from our Nature Recovery Officer, Roselle Chapman.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Here we go. Can you see that?
We can see that. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So there we go. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to present this work to you this evening. So as you know, as you heard from Chloe, nature recovery is an emerging priority for the Council and one of the 5 themes of the draft Nature and Climate Action Plan. And one of the actions is to undertake a biodiversity audit of corporate land and develop proposals to put nature recovery at the heart of our grounds maintenance team's operations. And it's really important that we do this so that apart from anything else, we can lead by example and demonstrate best practice for land management by meeting any challenges and overcoming them. So the biodiversity audit itself, well, I was lucky enough to spend the summer surveying council land in the Vale to see what we've got and what condition it's in, and to identify opportunities for making it work harder for nature. So I walked over 64 areas of amenity grassland and did a rapid botanical assessment of 22 of those areas. And those are the ones that are currently being managed by grounds maintenance team as meadow areas. And we also, you might recall that we also own countryside sites in a triple SI, but those were not included in the survey work because they are already being managed according to management plans. So highlights include, highlights in the Vale included a really lovely area of botanically rich, damp, acid grassland in Folly Park in Farringdon, and some amazing display of orchids in Mabley Way, and the discovery of a really exciting discovery for me, at least, of this very rare bumblebee in Wantage, and it's a nationally scarce species. And one of the things that was really exciting, it's our longest tongue bumblebee. And one of the things that was really exciting was not only did it occur in its sort of most common variety, which is yellow, black, and white stripes, but there was a whole, there was a lot of the melanistic ones, which are the all black variety, and that's really exciting to see. And there was some great, I mean, those sites were, those were the highlights, but there were also areas of opportunity. So, for example, in Cumnor, there was this area called the Glebe, which was really interesting. It's obviously an area of remnant grassland, original grassland, and it had a nice species diversity, botanically rich, and it had bee orchids and pyramidal orchids and a really interesting ancient coppiced, previously coppiced ash tree, which was probably sort of marked the boundary of the parish once upon a time. And there's plenty of room for improvement with these spaces. And on the right hand side, you can see in Mabley Grove and Wantage, it's quite, you know, there's nothing particularly rare there. It's just a really dense floral display, which if you imagine you're a butterfly or a bumblebee, that is just incredible resource. And so what we need to do with these areas of opportunity is get the management right, and make the areas work much harder for nature. If we manage them properly, for example, not mowing them all in one go, then there's great opportunities there. And of course, we would define the edges and mow paths through them. So the key findings of the work, of the 22 areas that I surveyed, 14 areas in meadow management are good and should continue to be managed as they are. 7 areas were really good and could be extended to cover a much larger area. And one site, I decided that really it would be better off, it doesn't lend itself all that well to being a meadow area, and in fact we'd be better off planting some berry rich trees and shrubs on the site. And 7 new sites were identified that could be brought into meadow management in the future. So this is quite a cautious approach, and I feel as though we can be much more ambitious, and we should be seen to be being more ambitious as well, and demonstrating to other towns, town and parish councils and community groups how to be more ambitious. But in order to do this, we need to overcome 2 main challenges. And the first challenge really is that our grounds maintenance team doesn't have the right equipment for managing meadows. You can see this photo on the right. You can see what's happened. The grass has been allowed to grow quite long, and then they've cut it, which is fine, but they haven't got the equipment to then collect the arisings. So you end up with this situation that's really neither good for nature or really for people. It's really a bit of a mess. And not only that, but as the arisings lie on the floor, they smother any wildflowers that are trying to come through, and actually end up increasing soil fertility. It cycles the nutrients back into the soil, and you end up sort of skewing the ratio between grass, which likes fertile soil, and wildflowers, which don't. So you end up in a cycle where you end up with more grass and fewer wildflowers. But if you can have the right equipment and cut and collect those arisings, then with time, collecting the arisings, you will reduce the fertility of the soil, reduce the amount of grass, and give the wildflowers a boost. But of course, as is often the case, by solving one challenge, you create another, and having collected all the arisings, you need to be able to dispose of them somehow. And we currently don't have a long-term sustainable system for disposing of the arisings. One of the ways of doing this is through composting, but there are many other options, and we'll endeavour to explore as many options as possible. And it may be that there is more than one solution to this problem. And again, if we can crack this problem, then it may be that we can help out. We can work with other towns, town councils, parish councils, community groups, and OCC, who also have this problem with managing their road verges and road verge nature reserves. So next steps for us, well, we are working really closely with grounds maintenance to identify the right equipment for meadow management, and to help train them and understand more about what it is that we're trying to achieve. And we will bring forward solutions to managing the arisings effectively, and align our future actions with the LNRS as that crystallises in the summer in 2025. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you for sharing that, Roselle. It was really interesting, particularly to see the pictures which really brought it to life, but also the challenges that we face. Some things I learned about anyway. So, do any of our members have any questions for Roselle about the biodiversity audit update? Councillor James.
Hi, thank you very much. That was really cool, especially the bumblebees. I just wondered whether you'd looked at or thought about at all the use of herbicide by the grounds maintenance team, and particularly I asked that because I know that environmentally concerned residents, this is something that they often raise with me and with other people like parish councils, whether they should be using in particular things like Roundup, which they often are. But I know that, parish councils who've tried not using Roundup have then struggled because they've then had a lot of complaints about particular areas, or they've struggled to maintain things in the way they feel they should. And I wondered if this was something that you had looked at all.
Yeah, we'll be working with grounds maintenance to look at that, but it's definitely an ambition to move away from using herbicides.
It's worth also mentioning that in the Nature and Climate Action Plan, you'll see Action 37 deals with that issue directly. So it's not the action isn't to eliminate the use of herbicides and so on, because we don't yet know if that's possible. Sort of taking on board some of the points you made, Sarah. It's about reducing it as far as we can and looking at the alternatives. So that's a piece of work sort of slightly separate to a lot of what Roselle's doing, but something that the grounds maintenance team are fully aware of, and we will help them where we can to look at alternatives to the use of herbicides.
Thank you, Dom. And just before I call on Councillor Clegg, just a question I have off the back of that as well. And this crosses over with, I think, the planning teams. But in terms of grounds maintenance and all the practices that you've outlined, Roselle, but including the use of herbicides, there's a large amount of land in our district which obviously doesn't belong to us. But in particular, I wanted to talk about new housing estates. I live on a new housing estate, live on Great Western Park, and all of the ground is still currently maintained by Taylor Wimpey, though it will come to the Vale. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, basically, because I don't know, it's handed over to us and then maybe we'll be doing our practices, but what maybe harm has been done in the meantime. But then, of course, there will be areas that are never taken over by the Vale and will continue to be maintained by management companies, and to what extent we can work with our planning teams to align their way of working with something that is more aligned with our own ambitions.
Dom, do you want to take that one?
Yep. So we're looking at Great Western Park as an opportunity, because we're fully aware, obviously, that a lot of the land is going to be coming to either South or Vale, and therefore the same grounds maintenance team is going to be managing it in the future. But obviously, tied up with that transfer of land is funding through Section 106 agreements, which may enable us, at least in part, to help fund some of our thinking around machinery and so on. Because of quite a lot of land within Great Western Park, for example, was due to be delivered as meadows. So therefore, we are going to have, in order to manage it according to the prescriptions that were agreed when the planning permission was granted, we will have to manage those as meadows. So we're going to have to find a solution specifically for those areas in Great Western Park. More widely, obviously the point about development sites where the land is taken on by individual management companies. So you'll be aware that the way that those management companies operate across the Vale varies widely from one site to another. And so some sites, we know that the management and maintenance is being carried out well and according to the requirements that were set out in the original planning permission and the conditions. And then there are other sites where it doesn't work so well. In those situations, we're really reliant on, quite often, on the public to inform us where things aren't working, because those sort of issues need to be reported to our enforcement teams, who are then able to get involved and, if necessary, take action to ensure that the management is carried out in the way it's supposed to be, because they will all have some form of agreed management plan associated with them, which describes how the site is meant to be managed.
Thank you, Dominic. So I take Councillor Clegg's question next.
Thank you, Roselle. It was a really interesting overview of your activities. I actually, many moons ago, as a student, did a summer job working on Exmoor National Park, surveying hedgerows for a summer, so it took me back. I had a question about the grass cuttings or risings. You said that the Vale doesn't currently have the facilities to deal with those, to turn them into compost. My question is, how sophisticated an operation is it to deal with those grass or risings? I remember back in my childhood, my parents would just sort of dump it in a compost heap, and over several years you get compost at the bottom. But is there something more sophisticated than that makes it more challenging, or is it simply just a lack of space?
It's not even that. It's just a matter of organization, having a plan. There are some sites where in fact they can get rid of the arisings under the hedge, for example, where there's not good basal flora already. They have some areas, sort of little corners and things, where they can dispose of the arisings. There are some things like squares, where there are no hedges and no trees, that they're going to need to make a plan for. But also, it's just a matter of, like anything, when you start to scale it up, it can get to the point where it becomes a bit unwieldy and chaotic. And somewhere like Great Western Park, you almost feel as though starting from scratch, actually you could incorporate a facility, not industrial facility by any stretch of the imagination, but it needs a plan, it needs to be organized, and it needs to be managed by a person. Maybe you go down the route of ending up with community groups, CAGs, that sort of thing, distributing the compost at the end of it. But compost heaps do need managing, otherwise they can become chaotic quite quickly. So it could be just a matter of several small, well organized compost heaps, arrangements. I mean, there are other things, you could get into fermenting the grass. I mean, there's all sorts of solutions, and we've just got to work with. What we need to do is work with grounds maintenance to make sure that whatever it is suits them, and they can use it. It's not that time consuming. It's not that energy consuming. That sort of thing.
Thank you.
It'll take time. That's all. It's just time and just kind of working our way through it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dillharp.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Roselle. It was very interesting. I was wondering, just across the road from where I live here in Abingdon, there is grass that's maintained by 3 different councils. Different parts of it are managed by the town, the district, and the county. And I wondered what proportion of the land that we manage, how does that relate to how much land county manage or individual parishes? And is there anything to be gained by joining forces so that there's just one body which is maintaining most of our meadows?
That's a sort of grass cutting utopia, isn't it? I mean, yes, and I think they're always working on it. Dom, am I right? We're about to take on the management of some of OCC's verges within Abingdon, for example. So I think everybody realizes that it's, because everybody's got to look at the maps and work out like whose is the green line, whose is the red line, where is the blue line, all that sort of thing. And I think they are all talking to each other about how to sort of minimize the chaos within that and make it much more efficient, because I mean, it is inefficient. And apart from anything else, it means that the handling of emails of, annoyed people because someone's missed a bit, but actually they haven't missed a bit, it's someone else's bit. So yeah, that would be great if that could all be sort of rationalized. But yes, so grounds maintenance are talking to OCC about how to make it all a bit easier and better and more efficient.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Roselle. I'm going to ask if there are any more comments or questions before I move on. Don't see any. So in that case, just remains me to say thank you, Roselle, for sharing that update with us. It was very nice to see.
Thank you.
So agenda item 10 is a carbon offsetting workshop, which is being led by Kim Hall and Jessie Fife.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm going to start off our little introduction today and then I'm going to hand over to Kim. So today we just wanted to kind of get a really sort of start the conversation of whether offsetting or purchasing carbon credits should have a role at all in the council's journey to reach our net zero targets. We've already talked today about how difficult the 2030 target is going to be to meet. And we are talking about that council investing in offsetting for our own emissions that we can control. So it's that 2030 target rather than like any wider offsetting or anything like that. So we want to hear your thoughts and opinions to provide a steer as we start to develop the council's approach on this. We also want to hear your thoughts that if we do decide to go down the offsetting route, what measures or principles should we be following to ensure the integrity of that approach? So Kim and I are just going to give a short introduction summarising sort of why we're having the discussion and providing a little bit of background, just to kind of caveat that with that this is a really new topic area to us as well. So we can try and answer any questions you might have, but we might not be able to, we might have to come back to you. So yeah, the council is committed to being net zero in our own operations by 2030. And I think there's sort of no doubt that the priority for that must always be reducing greenhouse gas emissions first, as much as is technologically and economically possible. However, our modelled decarbonisation trajectories that we looked at earlier in the year in this committee and were presented to Cabinet show that the council will have at least 304 tonnes of CO2 equivalent residual emissions in 2030, even if we manage to do all of the decarbonisation projects that we have potentially in the pipeline. And that also then will be released each year after 2030 until we do manage to completely eliminate our greenhouse gas emissions. So offsetting is something that would need to be considered every year until we do reach that sort of absolute zero, if we ever do. You have already kind of picked up that the emerging Nature and Climate Action Plan is going to include an action which is developing an approach to offsetting the council's unavoidable residual carbon greenhouse gas emissions. And also just to say that we are talking to the other Oxfordshire local authorities about developing this collectively to try and send a clearer market signal and support the county's net zero targets as well. To offset the estimated level of residual emissions by purchasing carbon credits, which are currently on the market, that would cost the Vale between £15,000 and £20,000 every year. However, that price is a real estimate. It's really difficult to kind of judge it at the moment, and it's expected to rise quite significantly as the price, as the kind of need for carbon credits increases. So I'm going to hand over to Kim now, who's just going to talk about the different types of carbon credits.
Jessie, so there's a growing number of local authorities that have started to integrate carbon credit investment as part of their overall carbon reduction strategy. And at the moment, anyway, two main routes for buying verified carbon credits exist on the open market. The first is readily available, and that is for overseas projects. So you'll be familiar with projects such as large-scale tree planting and renewable energy schemes that they contribute to global net zero targets. But of course, the co-benefits of those projects also stay local to those impacted communities. Various international verification standards do exist, and there are examples of reputable schemes. However, you're more likely to have seen questions around the long-term climate and social benefits and how they are or can be exaggerated, as well as the potential harm being underestimated. So multiple examples of poor credibility and greenwashing have led to a lot of ongoing negative press, and as a result, the UK's Climate Change Committee have advised the government not to rely on international carbon credits to meet its legislated carbon budget. So the second option is purchasing high integrity carbon credits from UK sources. Certainly at the moment, focus has been on carbon removals through Woodland Carbon Code and also the Peatland Carbon Code, with future codes in development, including salt marsh and also a soil code. But the number of those projects are not quite sufficient to meet current demand. Development of the projects takes time, and basically that means that there's only a limited number of carbon units available each year. And as Jessie talked about, prices are likely to rise significantly as the rush to 2030 and net zero targets happens. There are things called pending issuance units that could be purchased, which is effectively a promise to deliver a carbon unit in the future. And they can certainly help organisations such as ours to plan for compensating future UK-based emissions. The thing I would say is that using this route does require planning and budgeting in advance, and might not even be sufficient to meet our current ongoing offsetting need. Hand back over to Jessie.
Yeah, so I was just going to really quickly mention the project that has actually already been mentioned today, which is underway within Oxfordshire to develop new local carbon markets, which will involve offsetting via other emission avoidance or removal projects such as soil sequestration or renewable energy. So the local markets, as Kim said, are favourable as the multiple co-benefits of carbon credits are retained within the local area, and the Vale is a partner in the Innovate UK funded project being led by the Oxfordshire Local Nature Partnership on these nature-based carbon markets. However, a caveat for that, not wanting to have too many caveats, but this work is at a really early stage, so there are quite high levels of uncertainty about how this will play out. As Dom explained earlier, the project is due to finish at the end of June, and then we will see what happens after that. But there is exciting work going on within Oxfordshire and within the Vale. So yeah, that's something to think about. So Kim, I'm going to hand back over to you to kind of set up the discussion.
Jessie, so the short workshop discussion today is part of our evidence gathering to look at how we might want to actually frame our approach to offsetting over the next 5 years. And to be clear, this is only for our own emissions. And the aim is to develop a broad set of principles that recognises the fact that carbon markets are changing all the time, and our own level of residual emissions may well also change as we progress to decarbonisation. So we would like to kick off with just really sort of short questions, and then I'll hand over to the floor. So should the council be considering investing in offsetting at all to reach our net zero target? And if so, what do you think the council's approach to offsetting should be? Should we be looking at international markets at all, or should we be focusing closer to home? Those kind of thoughts would be really useful when we're putting together our framework.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see everyone, but I'll put the questions in the chat, and if anyone has any thoughts, that'd be great.
That's really great. Should we start off with Councillor Delaharpe?
Thank you. Yes, I was thinking about this a few months ago, and it suddenly occurred to me we're a cash-strapped council at the moment, and should we really be spending taxpayers' money on carbon offsetting at all? And I was worried about the ethics of that, or because shouldn't we be spending the money on vital services instead? I thought that buying carbon offsets from overseas is kind of a charity in a way, but I don't think council taxpayers' money should be spent outside the district in that way. So my feeling was that yes, if we could buy them from local businesses within the Vale, then it may be a good idea. So subsequently, I discovered that carbon credits can be bought by implementing decarbonisation projects. So putting up solar panels on a home, for example, counts towards that, which I didn't realise. And so I thought maybe that's what we should be doing, is if we can't get ourselves down to net zero, we could be installing solar panels on residents' homes, for example. But the figure you just mentioned of 15 to 20,000 pounds, that would only a year. That would cover 1 or 2 houses. I didn't realise just how little it was in the grand scheme of things. But I do like the idea of if we can't get to net zero, that we're either implementing decarbonisation projects on residents' homes, or we are buying them from farmers within the Vale. And that was my thought.
Scribbling those down. So I think just to come back on one of those things, there are principles that have been agreed that we will follow that look at things like additionality. So it needs to make sure that those projects are actually going to be things that wouldn't have already happened. So I think some of those decarbonisation projects are quite difficult to be able to justify along those lines. But yes, in terms of looking at options for us, other things, including decarbonisation projects, would certainly be on the agenda. Jessie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, other than there's a to kind of go alongside our Innovate UK funded project, Oxford City are also conducting a project which is also funded by Innovate UK, which looks at exactly that, and we're talking to them quite a lot. Their project basically invests in decarbonising business buildings. So we wouldn't be able to claim the offsetting if we put solar panels even on council homes we owned, because we should already be doing that. But if we invested in businesses, then that is an option. And yes, Oxford City have a project on that, so we're keeping a very close eye on that. We can hopefully bring some more information on that in future.
Gascoigne.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing all that information and tabling this discussion today. So so sort of differently to Councillor Delaharpe, I do actually feel comfortable that we spend taxpayers' money on this personally, because we spend it on all sorts of other things which don't benefit the environment and don't apparently feel any guilt about that, like car parks and stuff like that. So I don't personally see that as a problem, but the way that you've presented the arguments today about whether it's the international stuff in the UK or locally, then definitely, and maybe it's really obvious that the local stuff really does make the most sense. And even the fact that you were saying that for the international stuff, the Climate Change Committee didn't recommend that the government did that. So if that's what they're saying for the government, then definitely we shouldn't be doing that. But I think there's so many benefits from investing locally, because if we can claim the carbon credits, as Jessie also pointed out, that it sort of depends on the projects and so on. But if we can claim the carbon credits on those, then there's just myriad benefits, because residents will see the benefits just from being here, whether they are using the business or owners of the businesses that benefit. But then we also get the carbon credits. So it just feels like, for me, that's a good way forward. And then I guess it's just about how the mechanics of making that happen, because obviously what you outlined is like there's limited opportunities, how much you have to work with other local bodies like Low Carbon Hub and things like that, or if we need to be putting in a lot more time and resource into generating those opportunities. And I completely understand that that's a challenge. But one I think is worth trying to tackle personally. Yeah, I think that was all I was going to say.
Great, thank you. Councillor Clegg?
Yeah, thank you. I'll be quite quick because I think pretty much everything I wanted to say has already been covered by the previous two councillors. Yeah, I agree that we should be looking at carbon offsetting if we cannot bring down our emissions to zero by 2030. I also agree that we should try to aim at being as local as possible. You've got to kind of balance out feasibility and credibility of schemes, but I certainly think that proximity is an important one, and we should be looking to prioritise local schemes. Not only will it invest money back into the Vale through employment and so on, but I think also it's going to be useful if we can tell residents, yes, we're spending this money because we think it's important, but do you know what, look, you can go and see what we're spending on. It's a few miles away from your house, rather than it being the other side of the planet. And just having that local connection, I think, is going to make it an easier sell to any residents that are a bit sceptical of what we're doing. So yeah, I'm very supportive of that overall approach.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Councillor James.
Hi, thanks very much. That was a really helpful introduction. So I'm somewhat conflicted on offsetting. I don't think we can. I think we have to invest in offsetting to reach our net zero target. I think realistically that's the only practical way to do it. However, my background's in physics, and the thing with a lot of offsetting, it seems to me it works in accounting terms that you over here, you know, we emit some carbon into the atmosphere, and somewhere else somebody doesn't emit some carbon into the atmosphere, so that's a plus and a minus. But actually, from the point of view of the atmosphere and the physics, is just a plus. You just emitted some carbon into the atmosphere, and somebody else, you know, somewhere else somebody didn't, but that doesn't take away the carbon you emitted into the atmosphere and its long-term impact at all. Obviously, if you can actually sequester the carbon, then that does take it out of the atmosphere, but then you've got to sequester it forever, which is tricky. Now we could decide that, you know, as a council, we're only going to be responsible for, you know, we're going to sequester it for a long time, and then we are just going to have to hand over the reins to the next generation because practically that's what we can do. But the timescale, I think, does make sequestering very tricky because, I mean, as you said really clearly in an introduction, you know, if we offset sort of, I think it was 304 tonnes residual per annum, you know, in our sort of best case scenario, we then have to offset 304 tonnes the next year as well. And obviously, if you do anything sort of land-based, you run out of land quite fast. So that, you know, that is very tricky to solve. Yeah, I mean, globally, that's very tricky to solve. I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that. I do agree with what's been said, though, that I think we should prioritise schemes locally if possible. And I do think as a council, you know, it would be better to offset in a sort of, in terms of the physics, imperfect way by doing something like paying for retrofitting or solar panels generation for businesses or homes in the Vale, because, you know, there's a massive co-benefit there for residents and also for us in delivering our district net zero targets as well, you know, which obviously also in terms of the real physics of the atmosphere really do matter. So I think I would support, you know, what other councillors have said about the sort of prioritising offsetting locally if possible, and also prioritising where there are co-benefits, both for our district net zero and for our nature recovery aims, and just co-benefits for residents and businesses.
Thank you. Yes, I think the longevity is a key consideration, and so that's when looking at things, I think we're starting from the perspective of our principles and what we are happy to support and not, and then the devil will be in the detail. So the project that Jessie was talking about earlier, that aims to highlight some of the opportunities. So I think this is just the start of a process of identifying what's possible. Did you want to say anything else, Jessie?
No, you've got it, Kim.
Councillor Horton, please.
Thank you. It feels like I'm sort of echoing stuff that's already been said, really, but the main point, from my point of view, key point is that we should try our absolute damnedest not to rely on purchasing carbon credits or offsetting stuff where we can. We should be actually trying to do as much as possible to actually reduce our own carbon output. And secondly, the point that seems to be popular throughout, which is that we should keep it as close to home as we possibly can. Overseas, I certainly would not be interested in unless there was some other very strong benefits towards it. And then, if it's in the UK, the closer to us, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Last resort. Councillor Clegg, did you want to come back on something?
Sorry, yes, something Councillor James sparked a thought in me. I mean, first of all, Councillor James raised the point that this would be every year by default. We'd be offsetting 300 tonnes. I think my first point would be that we don't just get to 2030, say we've achieved this much carbon reduction, we're done now, we're just going to do carbon credits from now on. We don't do that. We need to be continuing to reduce our emissions after 2030. So that, well, first of all, so that we're reducing emissions. Secondly, so that our offsetting costs keep diminishing. I think my second point would be that if there comes to a choice between further decarbonisation and offsetting, if just playing devil's advocate here, if we ever reach a financial situation where we said, well, we can do one or the other, but not both, we should choose the decarbonisation over the offsetting, would be my personal preference.
Some agreement there. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to say on this? Shall I hand back to the chair?
Thank you, everyone, for your really helpful comments.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this discussion to us. And just to note that this, I mean, you did already mention it, but just to reiterate, this is obviously really early stage discussion. So yeah, much more work that will be done on this and refining our position, but it's excellent that we were able to input at such an early stage. And I kind of view as an important part of being a member of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee is providing that sort of steer, particularly in the early stages. So thank you. So the final agenda item today, and it's a standing agenda item that we have, which is update on task and finish groups and future items. So most recently we had a task and finish group on the local nature recovery strategy, which was hosted by our officers, and they used our responses as well as gathering some of the feedback to submit their response to the local nature recovery strategy just last week. So I think that strategy there has received lots of input from across the county, which is really great to see, and I'm glad that we were able to input ours through the medium of a task and finish group. As was already mentioned earlier, the NCAP, the Nature and Climate Action Plan, we were also input into that via task and finish groups. So in terms of future items, there will be something coming in next year about the local area energy planning, which Councillor Thomas mentioned in her update earlier in the meeting. So we'll have something on that in the new year. But now is an opportunity for any members here to suggest any sort of topics they would like to cover in task and finish groups. So I'll just open the floor to that. Don't feel that you have to give me an answer right now, because you can always let me know offline and I'll work with officers to arrange it should it be appropriate. Councillor James.
Well, I think I would welcome us getting a chance to look at the sort of Oxfordshire retrofit strategy, and if there are any useful suggestions we can make to that. I know from the Oxfordshire Net Zero route map that retrofit, sort of decarbonisation of homes, is such an important thing for actually achieving net zero, but it's also hugely important to residents, makes a massive difference to people's lives if their houses are efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not only about climate in this case, but also just the quality of lives of people and reducing their cost of living, particularly at a time like this. Yep, I've made a note of that one. Any other suggestions from members? I see none. So in that case, if anybody does think of anything, then do just let me know offline. It's not a problem at all. And as that was the final item on our agenda this evening, I will close the meeting there and thank everybody, all of the members, for taking part, firstly, but also our officers who put lots of work into not just the agenda items that we see before us, but obviously they're full working members of our council that do lots and lots for climate change, and we couldn't achieve our agenda at all without all their hard work. So I'll close the meeting there, and if you could let me know when the live stream has finished, please. And Candida, could you let me know when?
Of course, I'm just going to check it now for you.
Thank you.
It hasn't stopped, so if it's okay with you, do you want to leave the meeting and I'll deal with that?
Yeah, no problems. If everybody
Thank you, everybody.
leaves the meeting just now, then that will